It is 5:31, and I call this goal planning session to order. Welcome, everyone. We're going to begin with an overview of our 2020-2021 goals. Just a brief overview, because I think it's important, especially this year, to take stock in where we were a couple of years ago, and what we were able to accomplish despite all the pandemic issues that were thrown at us, and especially staff, and wading through those deep waters while the community was battling with a virus that just doesn't seem to quite go away. But I want to allow the borough manager to go over what we did accomplish, and I think was a good amount of the goals that we set out to accomplish a couple of years ago. So,
thank you, sir. Yes, so just going to hit on some key highlights for the public's edification. We actually had set a number of goals and strategies to meet the overall council's objectives for 2020 and 2021. But this evening, I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights of the successes over the course of those 2 years, and as the mayor indicated, during a pandemic. So, community planning, housing inventory standards, advanced the borough's rental inspection ordinance, enacted that in November of 2021. Use of home program grant funding to remediate key projects to preserve, protect, and grow the community. We finalized our home program construction and home owner acquisition in January 2022 for the properties at 157 and 159 East South Street, which provided 2 families, first-time home buyers, the opportunity for the American dream of home ownership. Provide support to the homeless community and those organizations supporting the homeless community. As you all realize, we transitioned the Stewart Community Center into a temporary shelter from April of 2020 through July of 12th of 2020. With the assistance of Councilor Hicks and a partnership built with United Way, we implemented the Carlisle Area Emergency Response Fund. Funding was utilized to support CARES and other nonprofits responding to communities' needs. Staff supported assistance to Community CARES through their zoning process for a second site at Spring Garden Street. Redevelopment and advancement of existing buildings while still maintaining historic charm. Council approved rezoning former United Methodist Church site at 45 Southwest from R4 to C1 to provide flexibility and redevelopment options for the. And this is a project that is actually going to be a reuse project of a classical revival building that's listed on the National Register. Partnered with the State Historic Preservation Office to develop training for HARB members in 2022. Topics such as demolition, economic hardship, demolition by neglect, as well as historic survey and best practices. Sustainable and renewable energy. As we know, we joined the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives to access inventory resources early on in 2020. Developed meaningful and measurable climate action plan that commits to greenhouse gas emission reductions. Council approved that plan January 13th, 2022. After extensive public engagement and a lot of heavy lifting by countless volunteers. Incorporate development and implementation of renewable energy system at wastewater treatment plant. We researched, and research was conducted and finalized by a consultant in October of 2021. That consultant came back to the borough with respect to exploring solar generation and indicated that we should do so closer to our contract expiration period with PPL, which is November of 2025. So still in the queue, isn't finalized, but we haven't lost track of that objective. Explore sustainable energy options within borough organization to include continuing to work toward a goal of 50% of hybridization of police fleet and EV charging stations. 2020 and 2021, staff worked with EV charging station providers on a procurement strategy. In December of 2021, research was conducted by Dickinson College on EV capabilities and utilization of parking facilities was presented to Borough Council. Spring of 2022, Dickinson College and George Mason University partnered with the Borough to continue research on the EV charging stations. I'm also pleased to report that the police fleet is approximately 46% hybrid now. That's if we've received the 2022 hybrids yet. Land use planning. Evaluate options to adjust or remove mandatory minimum parking requirements that would assist in mitigation of stormwater runoff and lessen development costs. We partnered with Widener University on model ordinance for parking reduction minimums and paired with parking incentives for zero-emission vehicles. Work was then conveyed to the borough's Climate Action Commission zoning team, and I know that we'll hear more about that. That's still in the queue as well going forward. Review zoning codes to maintain character of neighborhoods and preserve historic buildings. Among others mentioned earlier, in May of 2021, Council enacted a SALDO amendment to provide for greater transparency, additional plan review, and vegetative buffering. We applied for the Certified Local Government Grant of $25,000 to fund an identification level survey of architectural and historic resources in Carlisle. Economic development, where do we start? Zoning reforms, again, as we earlier mentioned. We also, it was key for Council that we ensure economic vitality be sustained through advocacy and collaboration efforts within C1. During COVID, recovery strategies were implemented, as we know, a number of them. $150,000 of CARES Act funding that the borough received. Borough Council provided in the form of small business grants. Borough Council lifted the sidewalk ordinance to provide business footprint expansion and lifted the open container, which both were later enacted permanently. Use of public spaces for commercial purposes, including parks and parking lots, that continues to this day. Free metered parking was implemented for a great amount of time. A moratorium on utility bills, later penalties, and termination went into effect for a period of 2 years. Collaborated with DCA, Chamber, CADIC, and others on a variety of small business support programming throughout the course of COVID. We were asked to promote sustainability in downtown through additional bike racks and recycling. The latter, I'm pleased to report, we have a pilot program currently in place. Bike racks yet to be explored. Continue communication strategy on transportation improvements associated with the Carlisle Urban Redevelopment Plan. Outreach meetings with neighborhoods affected were undertaken, either 3 or 4 of those. Social media elevated, and collaboration with Tri-County on their WAYS programming has just recently gotten underway. Employee relations and citizen participation. Evaluate medical insurance options, including plan design options. Council tasked the borough manager's office. We finalized that in October of 2020. Used an employee committee. So employees met, and it was facilitated by our Director of Finance, Richard Juday. They came back with options, including an HSA as an additional option to the traditional plan, which has been implemented, increase in payroll deduction for non-uniform and plan redesigns. Transparency elevated, live stream council workshops and meetings, provide additional info on agenda topics in advance of meetings, and we have a dedicated online platform called Carlisle Engage for participants to become more engaged and for their voices to be heard on policy matters. With respect to the fiscal area, revenue diversification, very important to council to keep taxes as low as possible while still adding community benefits. Throughout the course of the pandemic, I'm pleased to report that we were able to raise $101,000 for the new K-9 program. We received a $220,000 DEP grant, a $750,000 HATS grant for Project 1 of the Connectivity Project, a $30,000 DCNR grant for the Linear Park. We recently applied for $827,000 through DCED for a new fire engine. We've made various fee adjustments, and CARES Act monies were received, and as we noted earlier, how we were able to help the community with those. Service delivery options were also elevated, that it was important for council to include an e-commerce plan. We worked with a company to pay taxes online via credit card, electronic check, that's now in place. Trash and recycling, individuals can still order online and phone orders, and we'll still home deliver. Parks and Rec, it was important to evaluate the possibility of a skate park in the linear stormwater park plans. Skate spot, as we know, is in design and bidding. And it was important to incorporate features and amenities into parks that contribute to sustainability, among others, waterless urinals, LED lights, HVAC improvements at one of our facilities are examples. Police Department under Public Safety, pleased to report we achieved PLEAC accreditation once again, which is an extensive process to go through. Under the Chief's leadership, we advanced leadership training courses and supervisory training. For the Fire Department, we were looking at incentives to increase and retain volunteer firefighters. We continued the reimbursement of the earned income tax and real estate tax property credit in accordance with Ordinance 2320 that Council supported. And Public Works, as we all know, we continued to advance infrastructure work and dedicated funding to tackle issues of the borough's aging systems. And repair of pedestrian crosswalk signals in downtown. Again, these are just some of the highlights. A lot more there, but just wanted to hit on those.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the update. And we'll move on to the discussion of the goals going forward for 2022, 2023. What we're going to do is I'll run along our list of goals that Council submitted in advance of this meeting. I'll defer myself to the end and allow each of you to, if you wish to, provide a little background on each of your goals. Once we complete that, if there's something I suppose the Council would like to supplement or based on any discussion we have on any of the goals, we'll take some action on those goals. Staff will then take what we do establish tonight back and just do a report on the viability and the resources needed to implement those goals over the next roughly two years, and then bring that report back to us at our next workshop so that we can then formally approve this set of goals after we've had a discussion on the implementation and the ability to implement the goals we've established. And although I will say, when I went through the goals, I didn't see anything that really jumped out that was going to be impossible or outlandish. None of those where you're sort of wondering what someone was drinking when they when they wrote the goals. But I think we want to be conscious that the staff has a lot on its plate too. Some goals that are continuing from the last session, and provide them the opportunity to give us some background on what they may need, and if the implementation of those goals are going to be viable. So with that, I'm going to start with the Deputy Mayor. If you'd like to run down your goals and give us a little background, and then if we have questions, we'll come off. Yeah.
Sounds good. As Borough Manager noted, a couple of these are familiar because I keep putting them up. But I mean, I think that their time has come. The first one is, near and dear to my heart, and it's to activate underutilized public spaces, specifically the square. I mean, that does take a connection with the county if we are able to use the Veterans Square area, and it seems easy just putting some tables and chairs out there, which I do have to gift to this. So there's a very low financial investment in this. But I do think that when you see a vibrant, like, pedestrian area, then people want to stop and go. And that's why this Parmesan Square works so well. So if you give folks a reason to sit down and they don't always have to buy something, I mean, there's plenty of county workers that I'm sure would go out and eat their lunch out there, but still it makes it seem vibrant and interesting for folks that are passing through. So I think it has maybe not the direct economic impact that people think of it, but in the long run, I think it builds an interest and excitement to our area, and also the right to rest is real. And also, I don't think that all the benches that just stare at traffic are exactly what we're trying to convey. So this can allow people to talk to each other. And any other areas? I mean, the space right next to, just to throw in one more, CenturyLink. There are some little, they kind of look like kind of Cold War-esque, dark and dreary sort of benches, but they could be livened up, and I think that there are options and spaces around our downtown that could be highlighted and improved. I'm going to go to my third one, and then I'll jump back. The mandatory parking minimums, actually both of these, I mean, it's listed under land use, but as in possible outcomes, they note that it's land use and zoning, and that it does go back to commercial development, economic development. The thing is that every month we pass things, and we are limited on what we can change on some of these things because of zoning, because of what we have in our books. And it frustrates me. So, I mean, when I see a new house being built and I see where the parking space is and I see the setbacks, and I think it could have been better, but it's actually how we have designed it. There's, 2 houses in my neighborhood that have a setback, and then there's a parking in the back, and there is no real yard because we've structured it so the kids that live there don't really have much of a yard. But if we allowed it to be a little bit different, those help with walkable communities. They help with making things seem conform to, like, the way our traditional downtown has been built. So for parking requirements, I'll go back to 5 years ago now, when we were implementing our stormwater management fee. My concern, and still, is that we are charging folks for their impervious land, and we're also making them put in impervious land. So we're kind of double dipping here, and I think that seems like counterproductive to climate action, but also just, why? I think, and I am working with some GIS at my other job to try to get a handle on exactly how much parking, especially we have downtown, quantifying that, and we have a lot. We have a lot of parking. So when we hear the concern of, like, there is no parking, it's not accurate, and I do think that we can manage it and be flexible and accommodate the needs of parking. So it's not that that I want there to be no parking. I want there to just be the right amount that works, and also that can help us with developers that want to put things in. It can lower the cost of rents because you're not paying for parking spaces. It can lower the cost of development, and that can trickle down into business. The last one is Susan did a great job of funneling down what I actually wrote into a very concise statement, which is evaluate zoning changes that support the climate action plan and build diverse, mixed income, walkable communities and thriving economic development. There are so many things to unpack in that statement, but basically we have lots, and this came from me being on the zoning team for the climate action. Some of those things didn't get pulled out directly in the plan itself, but my goal is to look at these zoning ordinances, setbacks, urban agriculture. We already said about parking minimums, but things that promote walkability, things that make our neighborhoods more authentically diverse, and a lot of that has to do with looking at the density and allowing different types of housing in all of our communities. It doesn't have to be a 20 stories, high-rise apartment in a low density area. It can just be what's called missing middle housing, a duplex, a fourplex, something that allows a couple more people in there, and it makes it more accessible financially too. So there's things like that look, it does benefit climate action, but it also goes to the heart of how we're trying to be equitable in our planning practices, and so reevaluating some of these things. So I'm happy to work slowly and not put it all on anyone's plate. I'm happy to help do the work. But at its core, when we sit here every month and we approve things, I want to be able to feel confident that what I'm approving is the best that we could possibly bring forward this is the future of Carlisle. When we build something, it's here. So the faster we can get some of these things tweaked, I think we're going to be in a better place for Carlisle's future. So those are mine.
And does council have any questions or comments?
Just a quick question on the parking maximums. Can you refresh my memory? Is that done by us via ordinance, or is that's not state mandated, right? We have the power to.
That's in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And there, other communities have done it different ways, flipping the minimum to a maximum, and then having it so that you have to go to the zoning hearing board to ask for additional parking, getting rid of minimums completely, making folks do a parking impact study to bring forward the right amount. There's different options. The Widener students did do some work, but I don't think it really calls out as well as I would hope. So I think we do need to start with looking at some other ordinances, which I do have some.
I know you didn't touch on this a whole lot, but in your first school, the last item is part of that is expanding the alcohol ordinance borough-wide that we implemented in the C1 district. I was just curious if there's, at this point, any additional information on if we've had issues with that in the C1 or if we've received negative feedback. I know we kind of discussed it a decent bit last summer when it had been like a pilot program for a while, but since then there hasn't been a lot of discussion. And I was just curious if there has been any feedback since that point.
I was privy to a small business meeting that occurred one evening, and there were just concerns with the open container not having lids, and how to manage patrons when they come in to certain establishments with an open container, and so it was that seemed to have some discussion. I'd have to lean on Chief Landis. I don't believe we have. My apologies, Chief. So I haven't looked at the data lately. As a matter of fact, regarding the C1 and if we've had issues in downtown with the open container, your officers.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chief.
And I think I just.
We'll see how far you make it.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I would also add, this will continue to be a topic that we can discuss with the new management with DCA as well, and how we can provide support to our small businesses with respect to whether or not we require lids, signage that was thought about as far as posters and windows, etc. So, more to come.
Yeah, just to add, I think that could be helpful because I know, in my experience, I don't think a lot of people know about the fact that you can do that or how it would work, anything like that. So, anyway, opportunity for further discussion there, and I think partnering with DCA is a good idea.
And I didn't add in, but again, when I wrote it out, I put a lot of extra words in it. But Philadelphia has a Parks on Tap program where they, work with breweries, and we've talked about that in the past. But I mean, there's different options. That's why I'm saying borough-wide, because I think that it's limiting right now. It's been successful, but there's also limiting some of other opportunities. And as we've discussed before, there's lots of laws that keep like public drunkenness and things like that we can still hold people accountable, I think. But I think it would be beneficial to continue looking at it.
Okay. Does staff have any questions that would help analyze those goals?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think we have enough of clarity. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick couple comments. One, and I won't say enough to cause a spoiler alert, but Councilor Mellon also has something that touches on zoning, and so there's a sort of a healthy dose of zoning in a few of these goals. And I'm not suggesting that we include this in the goals tonight because we're going to have we have some heavy lifts in the climate action plan. We're going to probably have some heavy lifts coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations at the end of this year. But a number of us have talked about maybe it's time to update the comprehensive plan, and often zoning. I mean, zoning is informed by the comprehensive plan. It's probably something we need to look at over the next few years because our society has experienced the shift in the last couple of years, and I think the comprehensive plan needs to reflect that too. Mr. Crampsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. So I guess all three of mine might be continuing items, but the first one I have is reviewing the Human Rights Campaign, which is a national group. After we passed our anti-discrimination ordinance here in Carlisle in 2016, now they do a municipal scorecard. Carlisle is one of the, I think, 10 or 15 municipalities in Pennsylvania that gets ranked via that. So my first goal would be for us to identify 2 to 3 areas for improvement. Carlisle, as a smaller borough, actually does really well. I think our score last year was 86 out of 100, which is good for our size. But I think there's 1 or 2 areas where we as a borough can look at potentially upping that score. What I like about their metrics is it gives attainable things that boroughs can look at, and then there's deliverables of it's pretty clear cut. If you do this, you get 2 points, 3 points, 4 points. So there's always room to improve there. I think we're on a good path. We haven't gotten a lower score since we started, which is good. So we're not going backwards. So I have that one on there as maybe a smaller goal that might be I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but attainable because we're already doing a lot of that good work. One of the examples I saw in last year's survey was just expanding the anti-discrimination ordinance protections to our contractors. I feel like the ordinance may already cover that, but there's ways that we can do that. Did you have something, Susan? I didn't want to.
Yes, and I'm going to look over to Richard Jude because I know that the anti-discrimination language was run by the borough solicitor, and I think we're good now, correct, in our contracts. So that's already done. We will report that out, actually. Amy Barrier's helping a lot through the Human Relations Commission. They talk about the scorecard at every Human Relations Commission meeting. So Amy will help navigate that new information up to the Human Rights Campaign. I know there were areas that Amy actually identified, and Amy, I don't know if you want to say real quick what those were.
Thank you. Yeah, the transgender inclusive medical benefits is something that we already have, and we know we're going to get additional points for that this year. Doing the borough-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion training, that's pretty much finished at this point as far as the first initial level setting session. We'll then continue to gather feedback on that, and the training and the sessions and the education will be ongoing. There are, you can create employee support groups. The HRC Commission provided a lot of different handouts and so forth to explain what you need to do in order to score the additional points. So we have a lot of good information and a lot of items that will be easy to act on in the coming year.
Great.
Thank you.
Keep going.
Yeah,
All
keep
right.
going. Keep rolling.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So my second item, and this was on a previous goal agenda, and I know staff had been working on this, and I know with COVID and a variety of other things, things get put on pause. But reviewing and assessing the potential for us to do a borough-wide economic development strategy. So. I think we do a great job in the borough in this area, and as I think all of us know, there's a ton of interest and commitment from a variety of groups. So the Chamber, DCA, Destination Carlisle, Dickinson, right? There's a bunch I'm probably forgetting. But I would love for us to kick around the idea of getting that strategy put together, because we all won't be here forever, right? So I think it would be helpful as a borough to kind of have that guiding document that would hopefully have, deliverables, and here's where we're deficient, and maybe that includes zoning. So I'll throw zoning out there for a third time. But are there barriers to our economy locally and the developments that we're doing? I always think it's interesting when groups come in. I think of the Central Penn Youth Ballet, and they when they tell us how much they bring into the borough, it blows my mind in a good way. Dickinson, the same thing. So trying to see if we can get kind of that master document that pulls us all together and has us all going in the same direction, I think would be important. I know Councillor Hicks did a bunch of great work with DCA I would bug him for data, and it's not always easy to get that data. Like, I would love to know on 4th of July weekend what our impact is downtown, so we can as a borough see if we're doing things the right way, or if there's other ways we can help, whether it's small things like, or they're not so small, but what we did with snow plowing for businesses, did the parking food to go scenario, did that work? Is that something that should continue or not continue? So things like that, I think I would love in my mind to get that all together. I imagine a study would be pretty broad. We've talked in the past about the food desert that we have in the north side of town, and are there ways to address that? So I'd love to keep that going, and I think it's actually probably a perfect time to try to explore something like this with new leadership at DCA, so we kind of have a fresh start and some new eyes to look at things. Great. And then my last item, again, this is something that staff had already been working on, and it's kind of something we have to do anyway. But since passing the rental ordinance, looking at, on the staff side of things, reviewing and setting up that software that I think is going to be super important. When we went through that debate, a lot of residents were asking us for data that was, I think, probably hard to collect and have in one place. So I think for our new program, we're going to have that anyway. And then looking at ways that software benefits the borough as a whole. So not just, having a spreadsheet to have it, but what does that look like? And does that help, police and fire? And does that help us as a borough make sure that we're protecting residents and their dwelling units? That's all I got. Thanks.
Before I go to council for any questions, comments on that last item, where do we stand on the implementation of the rental ordinance?
Certainly. Jared, would you like to take the lead on your software implementation and where we're at with staff?
We're about 85% done. So it's We do a weekly training with iWork. And I think the last thing to do is set up the payment processing, and then we're done.
We'll check that goal right off.
Yeah. You guys are nice. Yeah.
Any questions, comments for Mr. Crampsey?
The only comment for the economic development option, I think it's excellent, and I did sort of reach out when I was trying to also work on the grocery option, and it did seem like there was a disconnect between. I know I think I had talked about KDIC, and no one seemed to really be taking the lead to bring something like that. And we were talking about the redevelopment sites specifically at the time, but I do think just sort of formalizing maybe some things that the borough would think might be missing, and finding ways that we connect with these folks that have outreach to larger developers and whatnot, and finding ways that they can understand what we see as a priority or things that are gaps in our economic strategy. So I think just having a general conversation so they can articulate that when they're having these conversations with folks is really helpful.
And just to quickly add to that, so I know, we as a borough can't, based on our zoning, it says what businesses can and can't go in, and I would never say, a business can't go here, but I think it would be helpful for the folks that are doing the recruiting. There's probably, I don't know if it's a disconnect, but there's probably a scenario where you want a tenant, right? And that's good for business, but does that set up those businesses for success? So if we have 10 cookie stores, which would be awesome, is that 11th cookie store going to be set up for failure coming in because they're going to pay rent and then realize, well, the market's saturated? I also think, and I forgot to add to that piece, it was interesting when DCA, I think they commissioned a study a few years ago, mainly around downtown workers and county employees driving outside of the downtown district during their lunch period. That was interesting to me. I think things like that, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if we have that data and then maybe through some of the other goals like the deputy mayor, is it because there's nowhere to sit and eat, so it's easier to drive somewhere where you can park and go in? Things like that I think would be helpful for us, as a borough to continue with the good work that's already going on and kind of grow from there.
Deputy Mayor reminded me of one thing I didn't mention earlier. Excuse me. When you talked about someone taking the lead on things, I think what we're going to want to produce out of this is who's going to be the point person, who's going to be responsible for each of these, and how there's going to be oversight. Are there any other comments, questions on Mr. Crampsey's goals?
I just have a comment about the scorecard. When I sat on the Human Relations Commission, that was something that we went over just about every meeting, and now I've been off for a year now, about a year. And yes, we had an 86 out of 100. I think honestly, looking at that scorecard and seeing where we are compared to other municipalities is something amazing, because we are small, but it does show that we are really putting in some of the effort. And so, I just wanted to comment on that because, I was looking at that, and I think everybody should have that opportunity just to see what the scorecard looks like and where we rate on it. So that was just a comment.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from staff? No. Okay. Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to start out by saying, we're spending a lot of time here, useful time, sort of going over what we call operational plans in the military, and these are scenarios of things that we can predict. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that the last year plus, we've been operating under a contingency plan. This is when things you don't expect, you don't see on the horizon, and you don't have plans to take off the shelf, and you react. And I think I'm heartened by the response of the borough manager, her staff, for being so agile, being so connected, and giving us good advice and things in the direction we need to take the community, and a plus for that. I hope we can execute operational plans more in the future. That would be nice, and we should plan to do so. But sometimes the real world gets a vote, and we we learned that we have a very capable staff. So I'm heartened by that. Um, I think as we move forward, especially listening to the breadth of the deputy mayor's goals, I'm looking forward to, I don't know, not really next phase, but I know we have plans in the future to do a strategic planning session, to, I guess, for lack of a better term, sort of look beyond the year or two and say, what's the community we really kind of want to live in. And I think a lot of Brenda's comments really get to give us an opportunity to really think about the community we want to live in. And I've sort of brought these up before, but things like, we want to live in a community where you can walk out your front door and within 5 minutes be in a green space that's at least an acre big, or walk out your front door, get on a bike, and be able to get to a market that has your basic needs within 10 minutes and do so safely. Both of those examples, we could all have maybe a little bit different assessment of what those numbers should be, but I think it's vitally important that we have those, that we have something that, whether we call it a ceiling or a floor, it defines the community we want to live in. And I think if we can do that, it allows us to make the types of decisions, the zoning decisions, the EV charging decisions, the minimum maximum parking decisions, the economic development decisions that actually point to a real outcome. And just sort of, I'm looking forward to that ability to kind of really get to what is the type of community we're really trying to build. And I think everything here is consistent with that. I know when I developed my goals, I tried to make them realistic within no more than a 12 or 18 month period. But I have aspirations as well, and I will reserve them more for another period. But maybe kind of starting the most ambitious of the goals I had was to really dig in again with looking at a first responder program that brings in expertise to emergencies that may be best handled by professionals who do various types of response, whether it's someone with psychological or training to calm an individual down, whether it's just to do some maybe further assessment before we need to deploy our police force. I think we all have a probably fairly close idea of what maybe a first responder program would look like, and I know that the county was interested in starting one. I think we realized we're probably on our own to get something started, and that's fine. I do hope we keep that as a priority, and notice I didn't put a start date there. I'm not interested in really doing much without a lot of thought and a lot of ways of measuring what we're doing. But I would like to know what we're doing, and I would like to have the outlines of a plan that says how we can make our communities safer, be able to deploy our police force to situations that really require their training, and not dispatch them to places where they might be able to be best handled in a different way. So the second item actually dovetails with at least one staff item, and I know one of Brenda's is identifying a street or alley. I think in the C1, as a designated place that is a sort of traffic-free zone that allows foot traffic, encourages community engagement. I know staff had identified a green alley project, but boy, that sure sounds like it's compatible with this idea. Could it be adjacent to the area that Brenda had mentioned, I could see this kind of coming together into meeting several of these objectives concurrently. But I do feel, I wasn't as successful as I would like to have been as the liaison to DCA to really take that next step. There was a lot of chatter about creating, blocking off at least temporarily or on a recurring basis to draw in the community families to feel like they had an open space, bring in vendors, bring in our own businesses, and just make a place that people could count on, that they could go to sort of meet other people in the community. And I think we have at least 3 goals that are compatible with that. So I'd like to raise that up to make progress on. And then lastly, I think we do a fantastic job of putting our future budget proposals together, a great background. I find myself kind of a little bit hesitant to suggest maybe potentially new capital improvement things that meet our goals, because I don't have that forward-looking view of what our commitments are in the out years. And I know every time I ask for these, it's readily available, and I get it with almost no delay. Making that budget process as a standard practice to be more forward-looking would be really helpful, at least for one council member here. Hopefully that wouldn't be a major lift. I think that those are my 3 priorities for near term. Question?
I'll jump around. I'll do on what item. I know the borough manager, the chief, and I spent, I don't know, like a year at least trying to get the county to come along on a co-responder program, hoping that it would, eventually lead to something broader, but it was going at a slower pace. As slowly as ours feels like it's moving, was going at an even slower pace. I've lost sight of where they are at this point, but I know we are working on the implementation of that program now. And, I don't know if you want to comment on it. Sure.
Yes, sir. Work is just starting on that. I'm looking over at Amy Berry. She'll be responsible for taking the lead on that. Council also did incorporate money into this year's budget for that programming. So certainly we'll continue to report out on that. And it is one of, we recognize that's one of council's top priorities as well as one of staff's. And yes, Chief Landis he's been a big proponent of it as well. So when he will be teamed up with Amy throughout the course as well. So the 3 of us are going to be working on that diligently. You have my assurance.
And then on the alley issue, I'll say one. I know a business owner who would love to have this alley back here, close to foot traffic only. But I think to top that, we may need to look at some of these alleys, and as narrow as they are, should they be 2-way alleys? Because that can be pretty unfriendly to pedestrians too. Just having and vehicles, I'll say. Sometimes I'm pulling in this alley back here off of Pitt, and somebody's flying toward me down the alley, and I have to screech on the brakes as I'm turning in. So if we maybe add that in there to take a good look at that too. Any other questions, comments from council?
Just a quick logistics question on the alley street closure front. So if we were to do that, because I know a lot of communities now in Pennsylvania are doing that again, even coming out of COVID, people still want to do outdoor dining or hanging out on Friday or Saturday. Do we have to approve all of those? Do those all come before council? I'm just thinking, I'll just use the example of like the alley near the G-Man, right? If there was a Friday night and we wanted to close it off for businesses to do whatever, set up tables, have a band, would that have to come before us at a council meeting? Okay, so timing I'm just thinking through my head, if we were to go down that route, we could do that. We could do future dates, right? You could, because I think we did that for the horse and carriage rides in the winter. There was a space. Okay, so same process.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Anytime a special event is being held that's going to occupy public space, such as the parking stalls, roads, sidewalks, etc., that comes before Borough Council in the form of a special event application, and council approves. There have been those that they've come to us late, as you're well aware, and I typically inform you of that, and you've given me the liberty to go ahead and approve it, so it can advance a while, and you retroactively approve it then at the next council meeting. But
I think also if we're truly doing it on a recurring basis, as the goal says, we could by ordinance choose that every Friday through Sunday, certain alley is going to be, closed off to vehicles.
I will say, I was going to, and I'll come back with my other comments in a minute, but I think it's media shuts down State Street, like from Friday to Sunday all summer long. There's a couple different places that are doing just that, and I think, but figuring out a couple locations that would be possible opportunities for that, and working with the businesses.
Just to piggyback on that, the idea of closing a street or alley. I mean, I like the idea of it being on a recurring basis or on certain days at certain times to start. But I think, at least from my perspective, it would be good to look at that as a first step in maybe finding or identifying certain streets or alleys that would be a permanent space for that. Particularly if we are able to start out doing this and then, find that we close off this alley and there isn't really any issue. We close it off all weekend long. Why don't we just close it off permanently and make it an outdoor foot traffic only space? I think, at least from my input on that, I think that would be a great long-term goal if we can work to get to that point.
Any other questions, comments?
I do want to say that it really pleases me that you all are, well, I guess I don't know, that are working on the first responders program. I know that these past few years have been, it's been traumatic for all of us, the images and things that we've seen, and now that we are in the world of social media, we see videos of people in situations all the time, and it's traumatic to see that. And, not just that, but just knowing that there are people who started really struggling during COVID, being home by themselves and isolated from people, and being able to help them in a way that that doesn't harm them and doesn't harm the rest of us that are seeing some of the things that we've seen. Unfortunately, we live here. I feel pretty safe here in Carlisle, and I have a lot of confidence in our police department, which is really good, and I know that other areas don't have that. So I just want to say that I'm really pleased to see that there's work that's being done on that, and it's good to see that you put that on there. I'm one of the newbies on here, so there's a lot of things I don't already know, but I'm just really pleased about it.
I have just a couple things. For the alley or closing that off, I mean, it doesn't have to be added in directly to the goals, but I mean, we talk about this alley back here. Are there bricks underneath it? Could it be a brick alley? Any alley that has bricks underneath it, I think it's just an opportunity, or that it'll slow traffic. It'll make that character and quaintness come out. So it is a natural traffic calmer for sure. And then it works nicely for especially like pedestrian oriented streets. So if we can also look for that would be kind of neat, because I know that I know a couple of the main streets, I know Penn and North are both brick underneath there because when we repave, but I think that's an opportunity to at least look at, and I think a small alley is a good start, because you're not supposed to be driving fast anyway. the other thing that I love to pull out is that 1970s plan for making the entire square pedestrian. PennDOT will never go for it, but when we're talking about making a place fully pedestrian forever, that thing is a beautiful design. But yeah, like thinking about, okay, if we can't do in Hanover, what is in that vicinity. And for the first responders, I actually had a random conversation with Officer Guido at the Dickinson Public Safety the other day, and he was just just talking, and he was saying that when he started in the area, I don't know exactly when it was, maybe the 80s, but that essentially there was the first responder kind of, that they didn't have to go out and answer every call. And I know that the times are different, but I also think that there's opportunities to talk to folks like him that maybe have perspectives on the long term of how we used to handle something, which is not unlike how we want things to be handled now. And I don't know how far, I haven't been part of those conversations with y'all, so maybe you have gotten feedback from other folks that have had good experiences in the past. But he basically said that, yeah, they would send out health professionals, and then the health professionals would give a call and say, yeah, we actually need some help. So I think that that's also really helpful to think like that we're actually not treading new ground. We're just trying to, bring it back around. And the only other thing with the debt and the budget, this is just something in general, and again, it doesn't have to be part of this, but I thought it was a good conversation just to add in. And that's the idea that when we're approving development, things that I can't comprehend, and I did have a conversation years ago with Borough Manager Canlin, and Richard Uday has helped me some too, is when we approve something, I mean, does the tax base of what we're approving actually pay for the future infrastructure? Because that's the whole Strong Towns model, right? So like, are we actually approving things that will give us the funds to maintain first responders, roads, pipes, and everything like that? And I think that I know that that's probably a lot of extra work on the financial side for our PBSs, but I think that that's something that's extremely helpful. Are we setting ourselves up for future financial success or future debt? That also goes back to the density question, that having slightly increased density in some areas can then add to a tax base. So that's just something kind of connected I wanted to bring up.
Okay. Anything else? Any questions from staff on those goals? No. Okay. Where are we? Councilor Mel.
So the benefit of going close to last is that some of my goals have been taken already. They've actually already articulated in some ways better than I could myself. So my first goal is about the increasing the availability of affordable rental housing. And we know that there's a long waiting list for low-income housing in the community, and yet if you go a mile outside of town in every direction, we see big, beautiful homes being built. So what is stopping us from being able to build a new supply of more affordable housing? Is that questions in density? Is it questions in changing parking requirements so that more units can be put on a single property? So the Deputy Mayor Land has already referred to that, but I think it's both a question of sort of fulfilling the goals of our climate action plan, but also creating more equitable housing availability in the town. I'll skip to my third in terms of access to food markets, as Councilor Crampsey already talked about in his economic development plan. So, if we could really work with DCA to actively recruit a food market to a downtown neighborhood. Obviously, we have the food desert in the sort of northern area of town, but even just in the downtown, there are folks like me who live downtown who are not willing to completely get rid of that car and that therefore not take up a parking spot because it's needed to get to certain shopping alternatives. So if we could either recruit a market downtown or look at some way of establishing reliable public transit routes to existing markets, not only to allow someone like me to get rid of that car entirely, but also to allow access to those neighbors who don't have a car and can't afford the car. So that's another goal that I would like to work on. For the third, sort of looking at modifying the current snow removal plan downtown. So we know that either when there's one big snow or several smaller snows that accumulate on top of each other, we have a tendency along the shopping areas of Haight and Hanover Street to have these large banks of snow that show up between the parking spots and the sidewalk. And it does, I think, really discourage a lot of folks from coming downtown until the snow all melts, so, and patronizing the businesses. So is that a question of the snow removal crew and the prioritization of that, or is it a question of changing the requirements for the local business owners and what their responsibility is in the snow removal in front of their shop, but just to allow sort of much greater access and availability of access points so that people feel more comfortable coming downtown, and also we don't have possible injuries of people trying to climb over those snow piles. And so.
Any questions, comments from council? Go ahead, Mr. Stuckey.
I know last year, I think, I'm already forgetting when it was, but I know that Borough staff, after a certain snowstorm, basically like clean streets downtown. I'm just kind of curious if that's something that is sustainable for us to do long term, if that was just kind of as a result of the pandemic and like a one-off thing, or how, I know there was positive feedback of it, but I don't know how sustainable that is for us to do long term every snowstorm, or what thoughts are on that, kind of related to Council Mellon School Day.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm glad you asked. And I'll start the conversation and probably point over to Mark as well that can provide a little bit more insight. Actually, it was very successful during COVID. It was another one of those strategies that Borough Council implemented with respect to trying to provide small business support during COVID and inclement weather. So it was was it 2 or 3 occasions, Mark, that we had overnight crews dispose of the snow. Takes a lot of staff. It's on average, I think it averaged about $8,000 for each removal because of the equipment and staff time involved. Overnight we do it because of traffic issues. What we did do, because we saw the success with it, also not knowing where we were going to be with COVID, we decided to build in the parking fund in 2022, additional funding in those instances where we would deem that we may want to remove snow in downtown, again, because we weren't sure, where we were going to be with COVID as of the beginning of 2022. With that being said, it is parking fund dollars. The parking fund, it's healthy, but I'm going to look to Richard. He'll tell you also that we have some big capital items, ticket items. So it all depends on where we decide to set our priorities at. I don't know, Mark, if you have anything to expand on.
I guess the one thing is that the piles of snow between the sidewalk and the curb is really the result of the property owner depositing the snow in that area because they really have nowhere else to put it. PennDOT plows high in Hanover, and they generally do not do the parking areas. So on major snow events, we would go and we would plow that area and then go through as the manager indicated, a special removal. but that's generally not a planned activity unless events require it.
Mr. Hicks, did you have a quick
yeah,
answer?
just a follow up on that. I think Susan's probably tired of me saying how important I think metrics are to justifying moving forward on something. My sense is that it would be pretty easy to justify spending $8,000 on snow removal for businesses. I could be wrong. I think it'd be easy. I could be wrong that it's worth it, but I think it is. And I think it's important for a couple of reasons. You know, people do ask, you know, why are we paying for this? And I really like to say something empirical rather than my guess. And that goes across. I think about the power outage that happened recently that affected for many hours our businesses. We have nothing we could potentially go back to PPL and say, you know, yeah, it's getting windier more, and this is going to happen more. Oh, by the way, you know, this is the impact it had on our community, and that's important for their long-term capital investment decisions. So to kind of bring, you know, would it be possible to employ like DCA or the chamber or somebody? You know, we need help. You know, we need help. We can't levy all of these things on ourselves, but to get just a reasonable assessment from our partners about what the impact of some of these things are would really make me more confident in supporting it, and I think make us all more confident when we respond to residents who just are curious why we're doing certain things. So, thanks.
So I have two things. One is just, I don't know if this is helpful at all, but, you know, whenever I'm shoveling my snow, it's way easier to shovel when it's fresh and not frozen. So obviously it's hard to always tell exactly how those snowstorms are going to come around and if they are going to hit us the way that we think, but at some point we're pretty sure or we're not, you know. And I'm not sure how much notice we have to put up to say don't park here, but if we could do that in advance and then be able to have some help clearing before it's solidified while the plows are still going through, I'm not sure if that would lessen some of the cost. But again, it is dealing with weather and figuring out, is it actually going to hit? Do you put the signs up? Anyway, that was just one thought. The only other thing, along with the affordable housing that we have talked about, and I do think that we need to, on the zoning climate action folks team, we definitely discussed it, and we've talked about it with the factory redevelopment, and that was the minimum size of the apartments, and we did agree to make it smaller, and there can be smaller footprint apartments that are still very healthy, and I think folks have a concern about if you make it too small that for some reason that alone will breed some sort of terrible thing, but really it's about everything, how anything is managed. So if you have a well-managed apartment building, you can have small small apartments that are more affordable, and so I think that that's something that we need to also, some of those factors are also limiting into how developers can put things in, and I think folks sometimes we get the feedback that developers are just trying to make as much money as they can, and of course they do need to make their bottom line, but it actually does trickle down to what people can afford and making areas that are nice and clean and healthy, but also available to a wider variety of folks. So,
Anything else from council? Any questions from staff? Okay. Moving on to Ms. Perry.
And what did I just hit here? I don't know what that was. So I'm going to actually start with the last one first, the quality of life. Establishing a halfway house for returning citizens, working with the Cumberland County Reentry Coalition. So actually for that, not necessarily establishing, because there is someone who, his name is Kurt Danish, who is the is the founder of Tomorrow's Neighbors, and he's actually worked with someone to get housing for returning citizens. So what he is doing now is he is asking for support. He sent around a letter, and actually, I got one as the executive director at Hope Station in support of this venture that he is doing. So, for this one, I think if we're able to help support his efforts, and not just his efforts, but the efforts of the Reentry Coalition and the work that they are trying to do here in Cumberland County and Carlisle, I think would be really good. So that one is something that's already in the works with someone else doing, but I would like to see us support it. And we had a meeting today. Our coalition had a meeting today, and I let everyone on the call know that the coalition definitely has to support this. That is the mission of the coalition, to support reentry programs and the efforts that they're making. I also offered to send another letter supporting as council member. I don't know that holds any weight necessarily, but I did want them to see that, I am supporting this in both capacities, because I think it's something that um, is important. And I also don't know if that's something that he needs to bring before council. I don't know.
You could bring it before council. Why don't we turn your letter into a resolution? I think that
Okay,
would be helpful.
because I did talk to him before, and I told him, that he should come and do a presentation before council, and he has a presentation, so I can reach out to him and remind him of that.
Yeah, we'd probably pull that together for next week.
Okay, wonderful. Um, and so one that is super super important to me is the support for Black-owned businesses. There are about 5 or 6 businesses that I work with personally that live here in Carlisle. There's a couple others also, but they don't live in Carlisle. But there's about 5 of them that work and live here in Carlisle. And I met with them. I didn't want to come up with ideas and what we should do to help support them without their input. So what I have here is what they gave me. Looking for building space, grant funding, mentoring programs, youth interns who can help build websites and manage social media for other businesses, was something that they felt like was really important. It is very imperative for us to support Black-owned businesses in this community, and to let them know that we're going to support them just as we support other businesses here. Um, One thing that really, for me, hit home and came out of the summer of 2020 after George Floyd got killed is that um, Black people need more. Honestly, I don't know how else to say it. Is that we need more. We need more businesses. We need more things that we are involved in. We need to be not just a part of things that are happening in the community, but we need to be running things as well. And and it can't be that we're asking always. It is, this is what we have to do. Education is important, but it is very important that we support these businesses however we can, and that they know that they have us backing them, um, and that they are an important part of the community. Because if they don't thrive, if um, if they're not here thriving and supporting the community, then the community is not doing the work that it's supposed to be doing, and the community is not going to thrive without them. So I have that one. And then I also have establishing a better relationship with the Black community. I know people are probably like, I've had people say this to me: is that all you talk about is race? Yes, it is. Um, but it's really important that, and not just the Black community, but all the communities of color that are here in Carlisle. Because what's happening is, at one point, whenever I was growing up, it was a smaller percentage of us that lived here, but that's changing. It's changing all the time. And there are still too many who don't vote, don't know who their council members are, don't know who their mayor is, don't attend meetings. And some of it, a lot of it is distrust. They just don't trust it because a lot of them, some of them, were born and raised here, and they remember a different time than what we're living in and experiencing now. But finding a way to make sure that they know that yes, they are an important part of this community, and that we don't just focus on other areas. We're focusing on that area also. So whether it be that, we rotate and have our meetings in other spaces, or even if, we set aside, times, a couple of times a year where we meet in a centralized location there on the north side, and we invite them to come just to sit and talk with us, tell us what their concerns are, tell us what they would like to see here, hear from them, and they hear from us also, so that they feel like they have the right to come here and talk about and ask for things, because they don't do that enough. And I keep saying they like I'm not a part of it. um, but it's that's something that I feel like it's really important in establishing and creating a more inclusive community, and also hearing what I mean. This is what we do, right? They're the people that we work for. They're the people who voted for us. Um, we need to hear from them, and they need to know who we are. That is the thing that I struggle with: the fact that they don't know. They don't know who we are. They know who I am, but they don't know who everybody else is, and they should. They should know, because if they know who you are, if they can hear from you, then yes, when it comes time to election season, and they hear you, you talk to them, they know you, they're going to say okay, and they're going to vote. They're going to feel more compelled to get out and vote, and right now they're not doing that. So that's it for me.
Just got a couple, maybe, a couple comments. One of your items overlaps with mine, so it's good to see. And two, the borough manager and I have talked over the last few months about. Initially, we talked about doing the meetings, like moving our meetings. I really feel like the town hall is going to create a better discussion than having people show up to these meetings, and just allow more of a dialogue. But I think that's absolutely something we should do. Any comments or questions for Council Perry? Deputy Mayor.
I have two things. Just one is just a comment, which I'm guessing it would be worked out anyway. But the halfway house, I know that we encountered something when Community Cares wanted to have or purchase or use the building by Giant about zoning, and so I wasn't sure if ensuring that we have zoning for anything like that, so there's not any barriers with that. And as for especially reaching out to the Black community. I mean, I think that there's the idea of the catch-all or the open discussion, town hall. I think those are very helpful, but I also think of like very specific things. And this is again because I'm in where I live. We've talked. We had some students do some work on multimodal electric vehicles, and there's two folks who happen to be African American. They could have not been, but they're in my neighborhood and they're riding around all the time. So I've thought about inviting them to a meeting because it's a topic that we're talking about, and there's some expertise in our Black community, and I think that there's opportunities like that, like when we're talking about urban agriculture. I have a number of gardeners in the park, right, that have experiences, and I think each one of us have the opportunity to invite people to the table. I mean, I know we can also take the table to the people, and that's also extremely helpful, but I think that when we have these discussions, if we have the ability of knowing someone or finding some direct outreach instead of only ever tapping into the folks that are already engaged. And I thought, well, what if they can't come, these two folks on the electric scooters? I'm like, well, I would like make a video and I would like get their perspectives and I would play it so you could still hear their voice. And I think that there's that does take time, but I have actually thought about it, haven't done it yet. But I think that there's opportunities like that we need to think about how we can engage folks that have some sort of knowledge and have some expertise, just like you reached out to those businesses to get their perspective so you could bring forward a goal with some with some direct feedback from those folks. I think that those are opportunities that we can all work on, staff and council and everything.
Yeah, just this your first goal made me realize how little I actually know about the challenges, numbers, that the reentry folks have. How many reentry individuals who live in Carlisle have a job or got a job within 6 months. These sorts of things. I know the opioid crisis is getting more acute. I would love to know more about what is actually happening, which brings me to my, just a thought. I don't, not an advocate of adding to our agenda a workshop or regular council meeting, but I would entertain the idea of having maybe a 5-minute block where we have a topic. There is an expert in the community we know. So Franny, you're an expert, whether you like to admit it or not. I mean, I know Judge Brubaker's an expert on what's happening with the opioid crisis, and we have experts all around the community, yet we don't know the most important thing that they know that we should. And I would just, and I'm glad I'm realizing how little I know that I should. And we can, I mean, let's face it, if we had infinite time, we could go find out, right? We could spend, but it might be an efficient use of our expertise time to do it, whether it's a town hall, a workshop, or what have you. But and I would entertain the idea of maybe blocking 5 minutes of one of our monthly meetings to inviting to just get a little bit more up to speed on important issues like this.
Any other comments, questions, anything from staff? Okay. Councilor Stubbe.
Thanks. I only have one item, so hopefully I'm not underperforming and submitting my goals here. But I thought I'd try to keep things concise. So mine is, by the end of 2023, develop a plan for implementing a participatory budgeting program, and to expand upon that with the goal of implementing it then in 2024. I'm not sure how familiar or unfamiliar everybody is with the concept of participatory budgeting, but it's essentially thing that governments, various sizes, some much bigger than ours, such as Philadelphia or New York, or some much smaller, do, whereby you're setting aside a portion of the public budget, and members of the community are determining how to allocate or spend that funding. So it would be, in a sense, us ceding or giving up authority we have as council is determining that, and leaving that to the general public. There's a lot of ways that communities do it. So, for example, just using Philadelphia as an example, because they do it in here in our state, my understanding is they set aside $1 million from their budget, which is obviously bigger than ours. And they have a committee that essentially oversees the process of obtaining feedback from individuals, and then basically having a vote on different projects and how they're going to spend that. Some communities allocate X number of funds for different neighborhoods in their community, and then each neighborhood essentially determines how they want to spend that money. But as opposed to just divvying that out to an organization and that organization spending it, it's still part of the public budget. It's just that the public is determining how the municipality is going to expend and utilize those resources, and projects can obviously vary. So I think there's opportunity to essentially establish parameters on what things funds can and can't be used for. Obviously, there are already parameters that we would need to follow as a community. There's obviously a decision of determining how much of the budget we would utilize towards that, and then there's the practical aspect of determining how we would obtain public feedback. So obviously there's a lot that would go into that. That's why I was putting this as a goal for ideal implementation in 2024. So it would provide us the subsequent year and a half now to come up with a plan for how we would do that. I know there are consulting firms that work with municipalities on this. I don't know whether this is something that is feasible to do in-house or something that we would need to work with a consultant on. But I think it's a goal that would, one, increase transparency in our budgeting process, because to be honest, until I was on council, I didn't really understand it. I know a lot of members of the community, even members who are pretty involved in the community, don't. I think it adds an opportunity for us to mesh this with our equity goals, and kind of along some of the discussion that was just occurring. I think if we would move forward with this or work in doing it, it would be important to ensure that we're getting input from throughout our community, not just one group of individuals. Obviously, there's the risk of a handful of individuals being very interested in it, and then we're only getting their perspective. So I think there'd be a lot of questions to answer in pursuing this, a lot of things for us and staff to figure out, but that's my goal.
Any questions or comments from council? We appreciate the one goal. Very focused. It's focus. Any questions from staff? Okay. Then I'll wrap it up with my view. I'll start with the one that we actually started the process during the pandemic, and it petered out a number of reasons. One, the pandemic, and the inability to have meetings for a bit with a number of elected officials from other municipalities. And that is to re-engage in the process, to regionalize the fire service. We were making a lot of progress. We had companies that were on board. We were at a stage where municipalities were going to need to start doing their end of it, and determine how we were going to be, what level of responsibility each of the municipalities would have fiscally, and what it would look like as a operational framework. But that needs to get restarted, including for a number of the reasons that Chief O'Donnell highlighted in the goals that he had on what we received from staff. One, I think Chief O'Donnell, you'll agree with me, that's probably statewide. There's too much there's excessive apparatus in areas. That's sort of a given, and the companies in the area knew that and worked together to determine what was really needed for this region. And I have to say again that the fire companies really did a great job through that process, coming together on that. Two is we have issues with maintaining and getting volunteers for the fire service, and it can actually help develop that and develop it in a cohesive regional way. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there, because honestly, even if council didn't adopt this, it was pretty much on me and the chief anyway, and the borough manager, and I'm going to follow through with it, and whether you like it or not. But it's definitely needed. Two, and this, I'll take the last two almost together. For entrepreneurs who from underserved communities, entrepreneurs of color, a couple of things, and both of which actually came back from the mayor's innovation project, having had some discussions on these. The first of which, a downtown sort of pop-up commercial space, and Council Perry had actually connected me with a business owner, a woman from who has a business in Colonial Park, who wanted to move her business to Carlisle, but wanted to get sort of a foothold first. Wasn't ready to go in on a longer term lease, and these can create opportunities. We used to have an incubator in town, a broader based incubator that was run by Creedic. They pulled it out of town. We haven't had anything like that for it seems like almost a decade. Borough manager, you remember when that pulled out? Probably about a decade ago. And it could be an opportunity for us to provide a feeder for other retail spaces within the downtown. And I can reiterate some of what Council Perry said, but I'll go a bit broader than that. We know that there's a significant wealth gap, both here in Carlisle, between the white community and communities of color, and that is something that we see nationwide, and we can trace the reasons for that back about 400 years or so. And I think it's be an important initiative. It would show that we're serious about bringing to our downtown businesses owned by people of color. Two, and I've had discussions with at least a couple of business owners here who did eventually start up a business in town, but they had a real difficulty accessing financing and capital. And there are programs out there to assist in this that we can adopt there are models out there that we can adopt as a local financing option for businesses. We can piggyback on other financing models. We also, I think, need to do perhaps a better job assisting folks through the resources that we already have, like the SBDC down at Shippensburg, that I think does an excellent job helping a lot of businesses. But one of the critiques I heard from one of the business owners was they didn't feel like it was there for them. They weren't getting connected to those resources, and that's not unusual. So I think if we're going to be serious about the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, doing something serious about the lack of equity, especially business equity in the borough, these would be important initiatives. Does anybody have any questions about any of those? Go ahead.
Just a comment. Agree with all that. I think you're bringing up an issue of a deep, more expansive need we have to identify favorable funding for different types of projects, whether it's energy efficiency and low-income housing. We need to find partners in the finance space who are willing to work across several sectors, in a deliberate manner. I don't know. I think we could probably, if it's helpful to identify a number, I think we could probably do so. But if we are going to make the effort, and I think we should, to find companies that are willing to work with us to finance projects, we should look at this in a holistic way and identify maybe, 3 or 4 specific projects we're looking for help. Obviously, I think we're going to need CADIC support and support of our state officials, but this was something I was going to bring up in the context of climate action, but I think this goes broader, and I think it probably is worth its own process to figure out how we identify some better loan finance opportunities. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would not sort of an extra comment on the one goal. I think there's a thread from, I forget, a couple of the other goals. I think one of the things we're going to see from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a suggestion that we need someone on staff, and it probably needs to be in a position for community engagement. I think it was one of the deputy mayor's comments, and Stephanie, we love what you do on social media, but what I'm talking about is someone who's out there helping folks make these connections, connecting the community to what we're doing, connecting what the community wants to what we should be doing, and also perhaps connecting us to those types of partnerships that might be out there. Were there any other questions, comments?
Just a quick question on the retail commercial space downtown. So is the thought that the borough would be the owner of that space?
Yeah. So there's a model, and I know they do it in Madison, Wisconsin, and a number of other communities where they either purchase real estate or lease real estate, and then make that open to businesses on shorter term leases to give them that that foothold. So it could be one or the other, whatever financially I think makes sense. The idea being that it's going to be at less than market rent, or less to those business owners, to give them that opportunity, and hopefully spin them off into a more permanent place downtown. We love when those incubators, right, come in. They get all that support and then go off to other communities, right? We want to try to keep them in Carlisle. So.
And there is, in Harrisburg, there is a woman who does pop-up shops, and she does them, I think it's every third Friday of the month, Friday evening. She does them, and she's actually taken that and made it so much bigger. And the work that she is doing there, and I've been invited to a couple of the things that she's been doing, but it's hard for me to make it, especially depending on the day and the times. But she may be someone that we could at least tap into, with maybe possibly some ideas, or helping us as if we decide to do this, helping us as how do we engage the businesses, how do we get them um, to trust that we're doing this, and we're going to continue to do this for you, and here's how your space can look, here's some different things that you can do to attract them. Like, she's doing some, like I said, she's doing some phenomenal work. Like, we're Facebook friends, but then I'm also following her page on Instagram, and the work that she's doing. And one of the businesses that I work with, Seagram from Newborn, who's the um, owner of Newborn Skin, has actually had a couple of tabling events at her pop-up shops. So, I mean, if we're going to do this, and I'm not saying that we have to use her, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, that there is that possibility to have that conversation with her, find out, what she did, how she got it going in Harrisburg, and some of the other things that she's doing with the businesses there too. Like I said, it's absolutely phenomenal. So.
Great. Anything else? Any questions from staff on any of those? No? Okay. Well, that concludes that section of our agenda. I don't believe we have any new business. We're going to have a workshop in about 20 minutes. I'll read the clock. So to wrap things up, just reiterate that staff's going to take those goals back and analyze them for the resources needed and ability to implement them. And then I'll take any public comment. There's Mr. Ulsh. Any comment? Nothing for us. Do we have anybody by Zoom? Okay. Then we will adjourn until 7:30.